On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we re-examine the collision between the towboat Miss Peggy and the bulk carrier Yangtze 7 in the Houston Ship Channel. Houston, we have a ship problem. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we've got some new information I want to talk about, and also an indication that this may be a bigger problem than what is being reported. Now, the thing about this story, I reported on it a few days ago. You can watch the original video up above here. But the thing about this story that keeps getting me is how underreported it is. A mariner on board Miss Peggy was killed, run down by Yangtze 7 in the Houston Ship Channel. The towboat was sunk and subsequently raised, and we'll talk about that. But this story is not getting a lot of attention. This comes on the heels of a variety of different stories involving shipping in U.S. ports, not the least of which is motor vessel Dali that collided with the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore and closed the port for 2 days and killed 6 people. We're going to take a look at that story and more on today's episode. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. That opening sequence and some of the video you're going to see today done by drone comes to us from Third Coast Drone. This is an outfit that's down there in Houston along the Gulf Coast. They do a great job of photographing and documenting a lot of what is happening in the area. I strongly suggest going to that site. Go ahead, subscribe and like. Let's boost them up. They're very nice of them to provide me with the footage of the raising of the Miss Peggy. This is the bulk carrier Yangtze 7. She is down in Houston right now. That's actually a picture of her at the lay berth from just a few days ago. Now, Yangtze 7, this is a ship built in 2014, 656 feet long, 75,000 tons when fully loaded. You'll see she's in a light condition here. But notice the streak down the port side of the vessel here from about 2/3 of the way down the hull up around the stern there. And one of the things that becomes clear is that there was damage done to this vessel. Here's a magnification of the stern area. You can see the scraping. Now, it's hard to tell because this ship is in pretty poor condition based on it. She is Liberian flagged with an all-Chinese crew on board. We're going to come back to that in a moment. This is the raising of Miss Peggy. Miss Peggy, a much smaller vessel, whereas Yangtze 7, 656 feet in length. Miss Peggy, built back in 1989, is only 130 tons, about 52 feet in length. She's a push boat designed to push barges. She was in a light load. She didn't have any barges with her at the time of the incident. You can see the large crane that was used, and we'll show you some video here of that salvage operation. So in my previous video, I showed you the AIS, the Automated Identification System track of the collision that took place. This is a much more sophisticated system. This is a Rose Point system. This is taken from a vessel nearby the area. They record data a lot faster than AIS, much more accurate in terms of tracking the position of the vessel. So I'm going to let this play here for you. And what you'll see here is the track. So this is Yangtze 7 coming north. Here is Miss Peggy heading up. Now, a couple of things I want to note here real quick. A lot of comments came in on the first video. So one of the comments that came in about Miss Peggy is she is too far over into the channel. She should be what's called hugging the reds. These are the red buoys. They are on the right side of that channel or the eastern side of the channel, the inbound side. Miss Peggy should not have herself this far out in the channel. She should be a little closer to it. She should be scraping the reds, as some people said. The other thing to note is this is the second worst part of the Houston Ship Channel to be in for a passing. Talked to a lot of ship drivers in this area, and they all said the same thing. Having a meeting situation in this part of the channel is one of the worst areas you can do it. And not only is Yangtze 7 meeting with an outbound LPG tanker, Silvio, but there is another ship coming in behind them. And they have another vessel that is right here just off the starboard quarter of Silvio coming in. But Miss Peggy is finding herself in a really bad situation. Now, there should have been communication. I have not heard the VHF communication between these vessels. I'm going to go ahead and let this play here. You'll see the movement here. Now, at this point, we kind of zoom out, take a look at the channel here. But this is where things get a little bit bad, as we're going to see for Miss Peggy. She is right here, fine on the bow. Going to zoom in there a little bit more for you. She is fine there on the bow. Again, if she had been a little bit over here hugging the reds, but it's a really tight area. You got some shoals here, some really flat water. Now, Miss Peggy doesn't draw a lot of water, especially in her light condition. However, she finds herself right under the bow. Now, both the Yangtze 7 and Silvio here have Houston ship pilots on board. To navigate in the Houston ship channel, you have to have pilots. Pilots provide expertise and advice for the ship's master. However, the ship's master, captain, is ultimately responsible for the vessel. Now, I want to go back to that issue I talked about before. Yangtze 7, Liberian flagged, Chinese crew. The Yangtze 6, a ship we talked about also in the previous episode, ran aground coming out of Wilmington, North Carolina. I know somebody who went on board Yangtze 6 while the ship was in Wilmington. The comments I got back from that was the ship was in pretty poor state. This is from the same operating company. The crew did not speak any English. The master barely spoke English. So if the ship's pilot, and an American, is talking and giving helm orders, how fast are those helm orders articulated? Plus, the pilot is going to have to be on the radio, is going to have to be monitoring this passing here with Silvio. Remember what we said, when ships' bows meet each other in the Houston ship channel, like all channels, they want to push off against each other, but then the sterns want to swing into each other. So playing the game of Texas chicken here in this narrow channel is dicey. What we see is the Miss Peggy gets under the bow of Yangtze 7. Actually comes in here and you see it getting kind of knocked off. It actually kind of almost deflects. It looks like, based on this, off the vessel, kind of pushed ahead here. And when you look at the speed, it does pick up some speed here. And then it gets hit and then comes down the port side of Yangtze 7. And you see right here the vessel coming to its aid. That's all the track I unfortunately have here. But that does correlate with that scraping image we saw down the port side of Yangtze 7 and the damage that we see to Miss Peggy as she was raised. This story is resonating right now with me because of the lack of attention it is getting. A ship ran down another ship in the Houston ship channel and killed a merchant mariner on board. And even in Houston, the local TV and newspapers have almost nothing about it. And when they do mention it, they don't mention the fact of the collision. This story from Maritime Executive, I even went to the maritime sites. This is one of the few sites that I see even mention it. Towboat capsizes on Houston ship channel, killing one crew member. It doesn't talk about why it capsizes. It makes it sound like the tugboat just flipped over. The only mention I find is over on Workboat. Crewman dies in Houston ship channel capsize, but then the only reason they mention it is because they reference me. The Coast Guard was investigating the accident on his YouTube channel, Maritime Historian Sal Mercogliano, of what is going on with shipping, noted that AIS data showed the Miss Peggy was near the channel edge as the 656 by 106 foot wide bulk carrier Yangtze 7 was passing close by, suggesting it may have capsized from that encounter. I am not suggesting it. I am telling you it capsized because of that encounter. This is what caused the vessel to go down. And even when I go to the Coast Guard, I'm not getting a lot of information. This is the site here for the Coast Guard 8th District. 8th District covers the entire kind of almost Gulf Coast region except for Florida up into the interior. I sent them a note. I sent actually a note to both Coast Guard 8th District and a Coast Guard sector, Houston Galveston. Houston Galveston is the area directly involved. And I got a note back from a petty officer, second class. I don't know from where, because there was no identification beyond the fact that he was a petty officer, second class, saying that an investigation is ongoing. That's it. That's all I got was an investigation is ongoing. I don't know where that petty officer was. He in Houston Galveston? Was he with 8th District? I don't know. And I even went to the 8th District news site, and there's no mention of this event taking place. And I have a huge problem with this because it is minimizing an event. When Dali took out the bridge, killed 6 people, and seriously impacted the Port of Baltimore, that was mainstream news back to back. I mean, I had the most popular video I ever did was that. I understand that that got a lot of attention. This should be getting a lot of attention too. So one of the reasons I think this should be getting attention is we've had a spree of ship issues in ports in the United States. Now, let's be clear about something. I don't think there's something nefarious going on here. I think that due to the volume and velocity that we move cargo and the fact that ships are being run for a much longer time, if you look at the Review of Maritime Transport by the UN, ship ages are increasing. They're getting older. We're not replacing ships as fast as we should. And the inspections are not being done. Just to give you the rundown here, this is Baltimore Sun. Dali-sized cargo ship briefly lost engine power Monday as it left the Port of Baltimore. This is from a few days ago. This is from our good buddy Hayes Garner over on July 2nd. Another big ship lost power near Baltimore. This time, nothing went disastrously wrong. So a second ship the size of Dali lost power in the Port of Baltimore. And again, we're highlighting these issues all the time. We've seen this. We had the case of the MSC Michigan 7, the Runaway container ship that, came down from the Port of Charleston. And thanks to the efforts of Captain Chris Thornton on board, who is a Charleston pilot, they were able to navigate the ship out of the harbor, out to the ocean, and eventually get it slowed down, bring it in. It was held in Charleston for 45 days. The pilot, Captain Thornton, was awarded from the U.S. Coast Guard in one of the fastest awards I've ever seen. The pilot who helped maneuver the vessel coming out of Brunswick, Georgia in 2019, the Golden Ray, it took years for that award to come in. This award took days. I should also note, by the way, I contacted the Charleston pilots to ask to have Captain Thornton come on and talk about that event. They have refused to comment back to me. I've sent 2 notes to them asking them. They haven't said no, they just haven't said anything. And I think that goes to a larger issue with the fact that the maritime sector doesn't understand how to do press and get good information out there. But that's a different story. Let's get back to this one. Then you have this story from ABC7 up in Baltimore. Coast Guard records over 200 ship malfunctions since the Baltimore Bridge collapse. And, again, ships they break. I mean, they break all the time. Anyone who owns anything knows things break. But ships, when they break, can have cataclysmic problems. And what we're seeing right now is a rash of them. Again, come back to the issues that we were talking about. This is Yangtze 6. This is sister ship of Yangtze 7. She was leaving Wilmington, North Carolina on the Cape Fear River on 16 July when the ship lost power. They had an issue in one of their cylinders. Ship lost power and it careened into the eastern bank, ran aground. Fortunately, 4 tugs were able to pull it off and the vessel was going. But again, there's an issue here. The ship was in pretty poor state. The crew, all Chinese. None of them really spoke English, so there was a communication issue there. And there's a question about whether or not the ships coming into the United States are safe to operate in U.S. waters, let alone the high seas. The agency in charge of ensuring that ships coming into the United States are adequately inspected falls under the U.S. Coast Guard, what's called Port State Control. This is their 2023 annual report. But this is one of 11 missions of the Coast Guard, and it is not a mission that the U.S. Coast Guard embraces in its full entirety. Being assigned to Port State Control is not a pristine assignment in the U.S. Coast Guard. It's not going to get you promoted, and especially for junior officers and junior enlisted personnel, they don't particularly like these assignments. Plus, they don't understand shipping as well as probably they need to. Now, we don't inspect every ship that comes into the United States. Based on the data here from 2023, there are 10,595 ships that visited the United States. They made a total of 81,854 port calls to the United States. Of those port calls, 8,278 ships were inspected. So that's an inspection rate of about 10.1% for all the ships coming in. And of those 8,278 inspections, 101 ships were detained because of issues. That's a total of 1.2% of those vessels that were inspected. If you look at District 8, the area that covers Houston and Galveston, for example, Houston had 25,832 port calls. There were a little over 3,100 inspections done, but only 21 detentions. That's under 1% detention rate. And Houston Galveston, which had 1,144 ships inspected, only 4 were detained, just a little bit under point three, both Yangtze 6 and Yangtze 7 were Liberian flagged, and Liberian flag vessels are not one of high risk, but the detention rate on those vessels when inspected was 0.85%. This chart shows you what was basically the major issues, with most deficiencies being either in the safety management system, of which 72 were noted. That includes maintenance of the ship and equipment, shipboard operations, resources, and personnel. The other deficiencies were in the area of fire safety, particularly the accumulation of oil down in the engine room, and fire alarm and operation systems. And then the other ones involved life safety. This is the aerial drone footage from Third Coast Drones, giving you the salvage work that was done on Miss Peggy. When Miss Peggy went down, they closed the channel temporarily so that they can set up a safety zone around it. They did have vessels, the traffic was resumed. They did put a safety tug on ships transiting the area, usually off the stern, so that they can help assist vessels in the turns. They prevented head-to-head passages or meeting engagements right there during this period of time. Now, ship accidents will happen, and there's no doubt about that. And I'm not trying to levy blame against foreign flag ships and foreign crews. However, the issue is that we are accelerating the amount of cargo moving in and out of the United States. We rely heavily on this. Only 0.4% of the world's ships are American, and the U.S. uses 98% of its exports, imports are carried on foreign flag ships. The U.S. Coast Guard is also particularly harder on inspecting U.S. vessels, I would argue, than foreign vessels. A lot of it has to do with the language issue and the fact that we kind of have proprietary ownership over U.S. flag vessels. We also don't have enough personnel to do it. We don't resource the Coast Guard anywhere near enough to go in and do this mission that requires them to have familiarity with ships, to have familiarity with ship operations of diverse type ships. Again, if you're on a ship inspection in Houston, Texas, for example, you may be going on a bulk carrier. The next day you may be on an oil tanker. The next day you may be on a liquefied natural gas carrier. The next day you may be on a cruise ship. You've got to have familiarity in all these, and that typically doesn't happen. It takes a long time to build up the knowledge base to be very familiar with the type of vessels that are out there and how they operate. And yet we're asking very junior officers and enlisted personnel to have consummate knowledge of this and identify issues that may be of paramount importance that could lead to the loss of life in U.S. ports. Video showing some really extensive heavy lift work here. They've been able to secure straps around Miss Peggy. Miss Peggy is on its side, and they are attempting at this point to lift it up, and you'll see it come up. But I think we need to start relooking at it. We've had a series of very close calls. Again, the Dali incident should be the alert for everyone. And the problem you have in the United States is ports are not under one cognizant authority. I'm not advocating that the government come in. Let's be clear about that. The problem is you have a whole batch of issues at play. So, for example, in Houston, Texas, you've got the Houston ship pilots. You've got the Port of Houston. You've got the Port of Galveston that's on the Houston Ship Channel. The channel is maintained by the Army Corps of Engineers. The U.S. Coast Guard regulates the channel. You've got the state of Texas operating areas in and around it, the wildlife, you name it. There are a myriad of organizations that come in that have to oversee a port operation. And what is needed is more of a kind of coordinating agency. When you look at what happened in the Port of Baltimore, it was the Baltimore pilots, it was the Chesapeake Bay pilots who advocated for a long time that that bridge was in danger, but they had no real ability to affect change whatsoever. And we really need this. This entity, the oversight of the ports, in my opinion, should be under the U.S. Maritime Administration. The U.S. Maritime Administration should be the agency that's overlooking ports. They have port grants. They do the port infrastructure grants. They have a port readiness program to ensure that the military readiness of these ports are available in time of war. They should also be the one who are helping to coordinate, not overseeing. I'm not saying putting the ports under the federal government. What I'm advocating here for is more coordination between all the different groups. We are going to start seeing more high visibility accidents. Here you see Miss Peggy on her starboard side being pulled up at this time. Phenomenal work by the salvage crews down in Texas. They did a great work. They were able to recover the body of the fifth crew member on board inside the tug. Really a tragedy, just could not get out in time for them, and thoughts are with the family on that issue. But again, we need to focus on this. There was a lot of attention on Dali and the Francis Scott Key Bridge, but not a lot of attention here on Miss Peggy. That orange kind of line you see in there, that's a containment boom because of oil coming up, oil and fuel coming up out of Miss Peggy. They're trying to contain that as they go. You can see them operating right on the fringe of shallow water there, kicking up the mud as they're coming up. So I think we need to really be focusing more on providing some key oversight of our waterways, of our ports, because again, Miss Peggy is a small push boat that got involved in a collision. If this had involved larger ships and had closed the Houston ship channel, which is a narrow channel and easily could be closed, that would have catastrophic issues for the U.S. energy system, for the ability to import. Houston has got this one of the largest container terminals in the United States. It's one of the major exporting areas for fuel, both oil and liquefied natural gas. We see major grain and ore coming out of this area. You shut down the Port of Houston, that has massive ramifications for the entire U.S. economy. So I think we need to take a step back, look at what's happening in our ports with the Dali, with the Yangtze 6, the Yangtze 7, with the MSC Michigan 7, and even last year we had an incident in Savannah with a ship, the Mer Surabaya, which almost ran aground and closed the channel into Savannah. We've had a lot of incidences. The bells and flashing lights are ringing and blinking, and if we don't pay attention to them now, it's our own fault. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Be sure to head over to Third Coast Drones, like and subscribe to their channel. They do a great job over there. But, also give them a super thanks. Also, if you want, hey, become a patron of my channel. You can do that either monthly or yearly. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.